Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's great to have with me here on the show, Eamonn Carey. Eamonn, you're very welcome to the Global Discussion. Let's begin. Let's get you maybe to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, the journey you've been on, and what you focused on today. So over to you, Eamonn.
For sure. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having me. First off, yeah, my name is Eamonn. I am now a VC and angel investor and board member and an author and weirdly a TV show judge at one point in the past. So have wear kind of a couple of different hats, but where it kind of all started, I guess, is back to a big thank you to my parents. So I was kind of always interested in computers when I was younger. I think my dad was probably even more interested in them than I was, and so he used me as an excuse to kind of buy a Sinclair Spectrum back in, it must have been 1985 or 1986. And I love playing games on that and buying magazines and learning how to code and seeing kind of how the process and the games and the programs worked. And so I always had a kind of love for computers growing up, but never did it in college. The number of hours was too long. At that time, I wanted to be a rock star. I was playing guitar and singing in a band, and that felt far more important than a future career. So I ended up studying journalism and working in journalism for a couple of years, and through that, actually kind of fell back into the computer world as I was trying to talk to people in the industry and colleagues that I worked with about, hey, like we should be blogging, we should be podcasting, we should be doing more online, thinking about this. And this is kind of late 90s, early 2000s. So just post the internet kind of crash in 99. So there wasn't the most receptive audience I've ever had, but I kind of felt frustrated. I thought there was a big opportunity, and the catalyst for me kind of moving away from journalism and starting as a founder was I took a trip to Korea to visit some friends of mine from college. They were teaching English out there, and this was 2004. The way that people use the internet over there was very different to the way that we did back home. So at the time, we still had kind of Nokia 3310s. Over there, they had phones that look a lot like our iPhone and Android devices now. They were using the internet on their phones. And I remember seeing it on the subway and seeing the way people were using these devices. And it was like kind of scales being pulled off my eyes, going, okay, all the stuff that we can do on and I didn't even have a laptop back then. It was like what we can do on a desktop computer, we will be able to do on a tiny little device in a couple of years. And so I started reading more and more and like buying every magazine that I could find and book. And I became convinced this was the way forward, pitched my employers about it, and they didn't quite see it the same way. And so eventually myself and a friend of mine were having a beer one night, and we thought, we know how to do content because we've been journalists. We know lots of people who work in large kind of corporates and sponsorship organizations because we've interacted with them through journalism, and I can code. Right? And so we kind of went, okay, what's the worst that can happen here? And so myself and a friend of mine started our first business, my first business. And this again is 2004. So no VCs, no accelerators, very few angel investors in Ireland. So, we hustled our way to revenue and hired people off the back of that and grew the business. And that was the start of it. Ever since then, I guess I've been hooked. So that business went through a bunch of ups and downs, and eventually exited and had a games business that was also, kind of reasonably successful outcome. And then an education business that was a gigantic car crash, but kind of took the businesses international, learned an awful lot of lessons around hiring and firing and sales and doing a little bit of everything that you do as a founder. And when the last business kind of crashed, I already started kind of, I guess, mentoring other companies without realizing I was mentoring them. So people would email and go, hey, how did you go into the UK market? Or how did you, open an office in Dubai? And so you'd take lots of calls and coffees and met a bunch of really interesting companies. One of them introduced me to this idea of an accelerator program. And I met the guys from TechStars who ran, at the time, was one of the biggest, still is, I think, one of the biggest accelerator programs in the world. And through that, ended up mentoring lots of companies. Their model is they invest in businesses, connect them with lots of those businesses with lots of mentors and investors over a 3-month period and really try to teach them as many lessons as possible in that short time. And I remember even just the first day mentoring on that program going, if this had existed 8 years ago or 10 years ago, the number of mistakes I would have avoided is incalculable. So I fell in love with the model so much so that I ended up about a year later working there as an entrepreneur in residence, and eventually becoming a managing director, running some of their programs in the US, and then back here in London. And so finished up with them about 2 years ago now. I still mentor, and I'm still fairly heavily involved, and set up an angel investing syndicate with some friends of mine alongside that, and then joined a fund based over in Estonia, investing in that part of the world again in pre-seed and seed. So I guess what I'm really passionate about is the first kind of couple of years of a business's life, like helping them go from 0 to 1 or 0 to 5, or maybe even -1 to 1. And helping people kind of turn their pipe dreams into prototypes and into products, and getting them to a point where someone smarter and with a bigger checkbook than me can come in and help them scale, or whisper it softly, they make enough money to be a sustainable business themselves. But I love it. I love the early stage of businesses and new ideas and innovation and everything else. So that's a long answer, I'm afraid, but it gives you the detail.
Well, I think that's probably the most concise way you could have said everything that you've done, because people only have to go onto Google, punch in your name, or look at your LinkedIn profile, and it's reams and reams and reams of experience. You sit on lots of boards. You've been involved in lots of companies. You mentioned TechStars,
Mhm.
one of the biggest well-known names in that sphere. I mean, 10, 11 years tenure there,
Mhm.
and obviously your VC fund today. But what struck me as you were talking, Eamon, is that early international experience. Don't we often hear the phrase "travel broadens the mind," and it certainly
Mhm.
helped, I think, didn't it, when you took that sort of international trip, not related at the time, I suppose, to business in any shape or form, but just gets the neurons firing, as they say, and the rest is history, right?
Yeah, it's kind of it's almost like an unfortunate habit that developed from there, because now I find myself going to new cities or new countries or different places, and you're kind of almost looking over people's shoulders to see what they're doing on their phones, or kind of what are. I remember being in Hong Kong a couple of years ago before the pandemic, and seeing the number of people that were using kind of push to talk on their phones and sending voice notes, and coming back here, and very like there was maybe Voxer and one or two other apps that you could use for that in the App Store in this part of the world. But I thought that was a real potential use case, and the kind of ideas around audio, and ended up backing a couple of companies in that space as a result. So I think, yeah, it's in general, I'm a believer that, if for no other reason than to be a better dinner party guest or a better person to sit with in a pub or in a cafe, whether it's traveling or reading, or just in general being curious, is probably one of the biggest traits, positive traits that a person can have. So I was very, very fortunate to have that opportunity to travel. And as you say, like this is Korea 2004. So mobile was huge, absolutely predated what we do with Android and iPhone. They were watching TV, live TV streamed to their phones in the subway in Seoul when I was there at that time. Like I can't even do that in the underground in London 20 years later. I remember seeing people in a mall sitting around a TV in the same way that we might sit around and watch the Olympics or the Euros a couple of weeks ago, but they were watching people play StarCraft. And obviously now Twitch and YouTube Live and so many others are like enormous businesses. But at the time, when I talk to my friends about playing video games, so video games are for nerds, and now they're multi-billion-dollar businesses. So I think if you go to a lot of these markets, if you're open, we spent a lot of time in the Middle East with my first business, and again, someone told me a stat that resonated, and it became a certainly 6, maybe 7-figure revenue stream for us, where they said it was about 12% or 16% of the world's population speak Arabic, and less than 1% of the content online is in Arabic. And so we kind of went, well, maybe we should just do a bunch of stuff in Arabic, right? And we did, and the market for it was, and I had like 2 Irish guys who didn't speak Arabic, but it was just one of those conversations. You kind of keep your ears open, and I think that's one of the skills that you get from journalism is, it's someone said it a long time ago. It's a piece of advice I give to people all the time. It's like you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You use them in those proportions, and I recognize I'm doing the exact opposite here. But when you're talking to people about business, or when you're having conversations, you just never know when someone is going to say something that sticks in your head for a month or two, and then all of a sudden you go, "Wait, that actually is really interesting. There's a kernel there that I can kind of, or a rabbit hole there that I'm very happy to fall down."
I mean, I love that, and I love the way you've shared your thoughts and insights on that. I'm going to come on to the business side and the VC side in a moment, but before I do, some people watch this show on video, some people
Mhm.
just listen to the audio. And for those listening to the audio, I'm glad to see you started off by saying that initially it wasn't business, it was music, and I'm glad to see there are two guitars on the wall behind you. So you still obviously have a passion for music after all these years.
I know I have a playlist on Apple Music that I shared with the Dave who played bass in the band with me for years, and it's called One Last Show. And we add songs to it all the time. It's like eventually we will find the time to sit down for a week. We will rehearse these songs and we will do a gig. I mean, the venues that we used to play, most of them are demolished or apartments nowadays. But we'll find a place to go and play. So yeah, I still play, not as often as I'd like. And there used to be a drum kit up here, but now I have a 3-year-old son, so I have to wait until I need to become what my dad did. So I need to kind of say that he wants the drum kit, but secretly it's actually for me.
I like the way you're planning ahead there. That's good. Well,
Yeah.
let's come back to the business a little bit then, because I've some experience of the raising money world, and
Mhm.
I've some experience in investing in other companies. But from your perspective, obviously, you've done a lot of this. One of the challenges I often see is maybe somebody gets an idea off the ground, but they don't have enough money, they don't have enough runway to
Mhm.
really get enough time to focus on it, and then they have to go and do something else. So we lose that opportunity. Maybe they do a friends and family round, and maybe
Mhm.
they don't know how to go about raising VC money, angel money, early
Mhm.
stage money, which is the often critical stepping stone to give you enough time to
Yeah.
get that market traction, to get that market fit, and to go on to, as you say, the next stage in the VC chain or the investment chain.
Mhm.
And then a lot of countries I've experienced, and I'm going to get your views on all this, hopefully, is that there's a big gap between the first round, the angel money, and then getting to that next round. And a lot of countries and a lot of communities seem to be penalized there because they run out of runway
Yeah.
completely. So it's not just at that first stage, but that second stage money can often be very elusive for people. I'm going to throw it open to you, maybe just because you see this from all different shapes and sizes. You've had some
Mhm.
huge successes. You said you've had a couple of car crashes along the way, and not everybody wins, right? So
Yeah.
what's your view on what I'm saying there, Eamon?
Yeah. I think it's so there are challenges and opportunities, right? I think there is a huge challenge with raising the money that you need to build a business. But I would also say now the opportunity to build something, even a very basic prototype or MVP, is the opportunity is so much greater and so much easier to do it. And I remember when, again, like maybe 15 years ago, talking to someone about, we were in the Middle East and one of the telcos over there wanted to build their own version of Facebook. Right? They saw how popular Facebook, and they were like, "We just want to build an Arabic version of this." And at the time, I remember talking to a few people, kind of going, "How much would it cost really to build this?" Um, and the answer we came up with was it was probably a couple of $1 million to build it, and then a couple of million more to advertise and get to scale and all of those things. And then about 3 or 4 years after that, and then that telco went on and they spent hundreds of millions of dollars doing this, and it didn't work out. Kind of spoiler alert. But a couple of years after this, I remember talking to someone at a conference, and they were like, "Oh yeah, did you see these guys are writing like Facebook scripts now? So you can buy like an off-the-shelf Facebook for $20, and you can just set it up and go with it yourself." So I think the barriers to entry are getting lower, right? Like if you're smart in terms of the prompts that you can use on I think Claude in particular, the Anthropic AI is pretty good on a coding side of things. But I mean, GitHub Copilot, all of these tools are quite useful. You can actually build a very basic prototype using AI tools that are out there, using Figma or Canva or others to kind of create clickable prototypes, etc. So I think there are steps that people can take that don't necessarily require 10,000 or 50,000 or hundreds of thousands of pounds or euros or dollars in funding. And I think the knowledge is also out there and much more evenly distributed. I think when we started out in Ireland, as I said, there weren't a ton of investors, there weren't a ton of books, there weren't very many podcasts, full stop, much less ones about tech. And now you think, hey, if I want to learn about VC investing, I can listen to Ari Stebbings. If I want to hear about early product journeys, I can listen to Lenny Rachitsky. If I want to, you know, read a bunch of articles about what interesting companies are doing, I can read restofworld.org, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to test things and learn things. But you are right, there is still a huge gap. Like the access to knowledge is fairly universal, I would say. The access to opportunity, depends a lot on a whole range of factors, including location and gender and a whole range of other things. But access to capital is still the big piece that hasn't been solved. And I think that's where TechStars or Antler or EF or local kind of accelerator programs, which have been kind of, that market has blown up really since I got involved in it. That's where they're helpful. And so I look now, I do a lot of work in Estonia. They have SBAN, the Estonian Business Angel Network, which is usually one of the first checks into lots of companies in that market. They have investment syndicates made up of former founders who are very open, run a lot of events, etc. They have the Estonian Founders Society that anyone can join. So even if you're just going out of college with an idea, you can go in and network. We have similar structures in Ireland as well. There are similar things happening in a bunch of the universities. So it's getting better. But there is still a long way to go. I think, a lot of investors still invest in their own backyard. In the UK, if you're an angel investor, because of the tax incentive schemes that exist here, it's very hard for you to say, hey, even if you see a great opportunity from a company in Ireland or Germany or France or much less anywhere else in the world, it's very hard to do that deal because you don't get the same kind of outcome, as it were, as if you did it in a UK company. But I do think that for people who are out there are now tons of resources that you can tap into, lots of Slack communities, lots of places online, as well as then the kind of accelerator programs. But particularly for first-time founders, I feel like TechStars or YC or any of those programs, they're just invaluable. And I have a bias because I ran them for a long time, so I have to say that they're good. But having seen the outcomes that companies have had, both on programs I've run as well as ones that I've just been kind of peripherally involved in, the amount that you learn in that period of time, the ability that you have to build an investor network with angels and VCs is substantial. But it's money is only part of the solution, right? Like it's I say this again to companies that we back all the time, particularly with my VC hat on. This is a merry-go-round, right? Like once you take your first million from an investor, from a VC in particular, I'm going to want you to raise 2 or 3 million a year later. The people who put that 2 or 3 million in, they're going to want you to raise somewhere between 10 and 20 a year after that. The people who put that in are going to want you, and so you have you 5 years to get to 100 or 200 million in revenue. And if you don't do that, you run the risk of becoming kind of like the less beloved child or being left behind. And that's a tough gig. Like I have a lot of companies who've raised money from VCs and built great businesses, but they just haven't built a VC scale business. And so, the kind of sunshine of the VC's eyes don't always shine on them as a result.
Yeah, I'm having a wry smile because I'm having a flashback as you mentioned that to a business I was involved in. And the minute we closed the round, we actually started looking for the next round because
Yeah.
it's that tight if you're
Yeah.
growing fast, right?
And I think people don't always like it's one of those things that isn't talked about. Like I spoke at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and a question came from the audience about why is more money not going into this sector? And so I was like, look, I'm a big believer of being honest, brutally honest if I can. And I was like, look, there are not a lot of massive kind of outcomes that people can see in this sector. B, the majority of businesses that I've seen in this sector takes them a very long time to get to 1 million, 2 million, 3 million in revenue. And so for a VC looking at that, it's like, well, that's sitting on my balance sheet, making me look bad versus the company that can very quickly accelerate. And so understanding the kind of mathematics behind a VC fund is something that a lot of founders don't really do. And I think a lot of people go out thinking, oh, well, I should raise money from a VC without thinking that means that I have to become really like probably $1 billion business within 5 to 6 years. And depending on the type of deal that you do with a VC fund, there are scenarios where they can force you to sell your company if you don't get to that point. Even if your business is successful, they may force you to sell your company for pennies on the pound if it doesn't look like they're going to get to that point and they're coming to the end of their life cycle in the fund and going, well, we have to close this down, right? And so either you buy us out or we sell it for parts. So I think there is a lot of kind of education that needs to happen. But I also think sometimes, and I was guilty of this as a founder as well, you put the blinkers on, you're like, oh, wouldn't it be great? I'm going to be on the front page of TechCrunch, and everyone is going to think that I'm amazing. And as you say, you wake up the next morning going, oh, like I need to crack on and like meet a whole bunch of next round investors. And as a founder, it risks taking you away from the thing. Like most founders I know, a lot of the successful ones, like they started something because they were really passionate about it, or they were really annoyed that it didn't exist. And all of a sudden you kind of go, well, I can't focus my energy on that problem I want to solve anymore. I have to focus my energy on all of these, like, people in sweater vests who go to conferences all the time and turn left when they get on airplanes and deal in saying no, right? So it's hard because you end up having to cede a lot of control in your business, not just to investors, but also to people you hire to do all the stuff that you used to love.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you've brought it nicely onto people, which is another question I wanted to ask you, because
Mm-hmm.
from your perspective, putting money into things, you mentioned or you said a moment ago, it's not just about the money. There's a host of other things, but people and investing in the team is
Mm-hmm.
something that a VC or an investor looks at quite extensively. Could you talk to that, but also maybe take us to we've been talking about that next round where if you don't have and you haven't built a structure in addition to that founding team, as you say, the detriment to the businesses, the founders and the people that know what they're doing, they have to spend money focusing on raising more money. And the
Yeah.
business can flounder at that point. Even if they
Yeah.
raise the next round, they've missed the opportunity or they've made some huge error of judgment and the business has gone off course. So they've got a course correct then, which eats into
Mm-hmm.
that new money. Could you give me your perspectives on that as somebody investing in companies and in people today? What do you look for? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I think so. For context, like the majority of investments that I do, we will be the first money into a company, and it was the same when I was at TechStars. So it'll be the first kind of external angel money in some cases, in most cases VC money that they've taken. So in a lot of cases, what we're investing in is an idea, is a clickable prototype, is a bunch of interviews that someone did to find out if this was a good idea or not. So actually, what you're looking at more than anything else is the team, is the person or the people behind it, and the kind of the way Techstars always used to talk about it, which is the way that I still think about investing. It's the biggest, one of the biggest lessons I learned from them is team, market, traction, idea, and that's the order in which you assess companies that are coming into you, because ultimately, if you invest at an early stage, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50% of the businesses that you invest in will do something either slightly or radically different 6 months or a year later to the business that you kind of went, oh my God, I fell in love with this business. And now it's a direct to consumer, whatever dog business, right? Like a dog grooming business. So I think you have to kind of be like, I want to back these founders. And I think there's something in the market that they're going after. I don't really care too much about the traction at an early stage. Like I care if they've spoken to customers, I care if they've done some testing, etc. But I don't expect them to have revenue or impressive numbers. But yeah, you almost think about the idea last, just because the idea in a very early stage business is by far the most fragile thing. So you over-index on spending time with people. That made investing during COVID very hard. Like I always used to try and go to people's office or go and have a lunch or have a glass of wine with them or have a coffee or a breakfast. Ideally, try to meet all of the team. So you're trying to look for the way that people interact with each other. If you ask a technical question, does the CEO answer it and the CTO sits back and rolls their eyes, right? Like all of these kind of little micro things that you're looking out for in terms of relationships. And I'm also fascinated by like why people start companies, right? In my experience and perspective, it's like it's the craziest, stupidest thing that you can ever do. Also, one of the best, but the why is frequently much more interesting than the what. So you definitely try to get a picture for people. And I think one of the it's one of the nice things from my perspective, but it's one of the things people struggle with is, if you do it that way, you have to be careful not to over-index on investing in people where you're like, I want this person, like this person could be a friend of mine. They're real nice to go and have lunch with. I like the idea that they're working on. They seem like a nice person. You have to be careful not to then go, oh yeah, of course I'll invest in. Wouldn't it be cool to hang out with them every month? Like you almost have to tamp that down, and try to look at kind of other aspects of the business or other founders, etc. That that might be more interesting for different reasons. But I do think it does make it challenging if you're the first money in and things aren't working out, right? Because in many cases, you also then become like the person who can offer that company a bridge. Because if they raise money from a VC, like a pre-seed VC, we lead their round, we own 10 or 12% of the company. The rest of that round will be maybe a bunch of kind of 15, 20, like 5, 10, 50K tickets from angels. And so if that business is running out of money after 14, 15 months, it's got maybe 2, 3 months worth of runway. They still feel like they might get to some inflection point, but they need another 200K or 500K to extend the runway a little bit. We are the first people that they come to, and also the last people that they come to. And so that can be hard because I try insofar as I can to look at, metrics and results after we've invested, and you look for traction, you look for revenue, you look for the kind of green shoots happening in a business. But there are lots of occasions where, that doesn't happen. And I think it's very important from my perspective that you have a conversation, like a frank conversation with founders at that point to go, I have seen lots of people drive themselves to madness and drink and oblivion and all sorts of different things by continuing to try and knock down a wall that or kick in a door that is just it's cement, like it's not opening. And in many cases, I think founders, particularly European founders, I would say, feel like failure is like a really terrible thing. Whereas, and you can see, I described the business that didn't work for me like as a car crash. When I was talking to friends of mine in the US about it, they were like, "You just had a great learning experience." And it's like, yeah, that actually is how I should think about it. And you shouldn't be afraid to say to VC, like, my job is to risk money. I know half of the deals that I do are probably not going to work out for a variety of reasons. Usually, it's not the founder's fault. On the rare occasions that it is, you can also be frank with them and say that. But it's certainly hard, and I do think it's incumbent on good investors, whether they be VCs or angels, to like look at those numbers and be frank with founders and go, look, I know this is like you and I both know this isn't working. I'm willing to articulate it. And I think either you need to go and, think, is there something different that you can do, or pivot that you can make, a way to kind of a hire that you can bring in, etc. But yeah, it's challenging. And likewise, helping companies hire so that they can spend more time fundraising. Again, I look at that from the risk profile of that in terms of the business, and I go, hey, we back these 3 really smart people to build this amazing business, and now the 3 most incredible people within the company, I'm going to pay them to hire someone who isn't fully trained up, doesn't really get it, is going to have to learn on the job for 6 months and may end up tanking some revenue or losing a partnership because I have to send you on a plane to New York and San Francisco to schmooze some people. It's hard to balance it, but the advice I always give to companies is like, you have to, and it's one of the biggest reasons to have a co-founder, is the ability to divide and conquer. Like someone, you have to go, if you're fundraising, like one person leads on that, and 1 or 2 or other co-founders or early team members stay behind to kind of manage the ship. Because I think, and we said the same to companies doing TechStars, like divide and conquer. If the CEO is doing everything, then they're doing nothing. And so you have to be willing to kind of divide and conquer.
So with all the trials, tribulations, and phenomenal opportunities that come with this scenario that we're talking about here today, how important is it? And I'm saying this in the context of a lot of businesses, they won't end up in the business they start off trying to develop because, as you say, they'll pivot, they'll do something else. They'll come up with another great idea to take the business slightly this way or slightly that way. And that's fine. But how important is it from the business owner's perspective or the founding team's perspective to think about the investors coming in, even if it is early stage money, to think about follow on money? Is there somebody in that group that would go again for another round? Is that critical?
Yeah, you have to have someone who can be a catalyst for the next round. And that might not necessarily be that they will put more money in, but they have a network of people that they will open up. So it might be an angel investor whose last company raised from 10 of the best VCs in the world, and they still know the partners there, and they can open the door. So you have to be strategic in a variety of ways about who you take into the business, because you take in an investor, you can't get rid of them, right? And so if they're assholes, or if the money is sketchy, and we've seen this a lot, like there were quite a few companies in the not too distant past who raised money from funds that were tied that had money from Russia, and in some cases from sanctioned individuals and sanctioned organizations. Those companies are toast, right? They cannot do business anywhere certainly in the US and largely in the EU as well. So you have to be really careful about where you take your money from. It's not always necessarily, from folks like that, but we have had businesses that have really struggled because they had toxic people as investors. And I know that it's very easy for me to say don't take money from obnoxious people. Like sometimes you just have to take money where it's available, but it is worth bearing in mind. So the quality of people you bring in can really lead to those introductions. And yeah, one of the things, like, we reserve, the money in our fund, half of it will go into primary investment. So the first check into a company, we keep about roughly the other half is to do follow-ons. So, if we lead your pre-seed round, there's a pretty good chance that we will at least take the pro rata in your seed round. And we know how bad it would look for that company if we didn't. Like, if they go and raise we put in $1 million, and then they're going out to raise 3 million, and someone says, hey, are Tera putting in their pro rata? And they say no, better than average chance that deal is not going to happen, because they'll go, well, those guys must have seen something that stinks in there. So yeah, you do. And it's a question founders should ask, right? Like, for angel investors, what does your network look like? Who's co-invested after who's invested after you've put money in? For VCs, the same thing. Like, which are the funds that you have the closest relationship with? Do you have capital reserved for follow-on? Will you be able to kind of support us the whole way through? And it's important to get that network around you, because again, fundraising is hard, and if you can get a couple of people to make some intros or shorten the process slightly, it's a net positive for you.
Thank you. I love that. I agree with everything that you've said there. Very insightful. And we've talked a bit about, the people putting the money in and the people taking that money and growing their businesses. But the third sort of scenario I want to introduce is there are a lot of people who maybe they've been in traditional employment, they've risen through the ranks, they've made money, and they've been investing in companies. Or they've been an entrepreneur, they've had a couple of successful exits, they've made a little bit of money, and they've been doing personal investments into companies, whether it's friends and family rounds or some initial seed money. How do they make that transition? How did you go about making that transition from founder, author, TV, few investments, I'm sure, and then getting involved with TechStars, and then all of a sudden I'm running my own sort of VC firm. What's involved in taking that step from that scenario perspective?
It's a little bit like the, again, slight cliche that I tell founders when they're going out fundraising. It's like you kiss a lot of frogs, right? So when I started out, like, I moved to London about 14 or 15 years ago. My wife, or then girlfriend, now wife, was doing a master's here. We had an operation that was growing in Dubai, and so it was easier for me to fly from London than it was from Dublin. But I kind of came over here knowing kind of no one, and so I would go to everything. Like, the opening of an envelope, great, I'll go along. I'll have a coffee. I might meet someone. Office hours with someone, okay, great, I'll go along. Open coffee morning, etc. So you go to 20 or 30 of those events, and you suddenly start to see the 3 or 4 of the same people, and you kind of get to know them, and then they invite you to an event that isn't listed anywhere else, and so you meet a few more people. But it is really about kind of building a network, and starting to kind of build connections that will either tell you about a deal that they're investing in, or will go, oh yeah, Eamonn, help this company expand into the US, and you want to expand it, I'll connect you with Eamonn, and then hopefully you help that business. They go back to that person and say, oh, Eamonn was great, and you get a few more calls or referrals or introductions from that. But a lot of it is really just showing up and building those connections and building that network, because then when it came to joining TechStars, and they were even in that interview process where they were like, oh, what do you do to help companies with follow-on investing? It's like, well, I kind of know, like, these 40 people who are VCs, and I know these like 80 people, and I'm part of this network, and I'm part of this event, and so I can basically bring a bunch of those people, or bring a bunch of that network to the table. Or I know these founders, I know these people from bigger businesses that I helped 4 years ago who are now like infinitely more successful. So it is really just about kind of networking, building relationships. And then the other critical thing is like not being afraid to tell people that you're looking to get into VC, or that you're looking for. I think people think it's like weakness to go, I would love a job. Do you know any VCs that are hiring? Like that, once you have that network, then it's time to kind of sweat it a little bit and say, oh yeah, I'd love yeah, I want to do more AI investing. Who should I talk to? Oh, go and talk to Cambridge Angels. Oh, can you connect me? Yeah, okay. I find a lot of people who want to get into VC who, they make a couple of investments, they do a few deals, and then they're kind of sitting there waiting for like the VC taxi to pull up and say, hey, do you want to get in? It's like, no, you have to Uber it, right? Like you have to say the on-demand element is there. So you definitely kind of network your way in. And probably took me a couple of months, maybe a couple of years even to well, certainly a couple of years to get to know tons and tons of people. And it was the same when I started going, like I've invested in a lot of companies in Ukraine, in Estonia, across kind of Central and Eastern Europe. And again, building networks in those places was like, I would go to events, I would run seminars and workshops, I would kind of volunteer my time to mentor on accelerator programs or mentor university programs or startup weekends. And, by just doing that consistently, it was like, oh, wow, this person showed up again. Okay, that's cool. B, they must care a little bit about this ecosystem because they're flying here, twice a year or something. Like, let's have a conversation, let's have a lunch and dig in a bit more. And so that was kind of I wouldn't say it was necessarily a systematic process that I thought through. It kind of just accidentally happened the first time. And I was like, oh yeah, I should just do that again. And when I moved to New York, I did the same thing with TechStars. There were, breakfast, lunch, dinner, drinks, every single day for the first month or two that I was there to just, and every single person I met, I was like, hey, you've heard my spiel, like who else should I chat to? And they go, oh yeah, this person. So yeah, you kind of sweat the network a little bit.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it
It's
is
a
a
long,
building
long
process,
process.
right? Yeah, and I was going to say you kind of drew some parallels earlier between being on the subway and watching people watch games, and today we have Twitch, in this part of the world, whereas that was many years ago,
Mm.
um, in other parts of the world, but. The tools today, if I'm starting up a business today, I don't need to buy tons of servers and buy a rack and find somewhere to host it and sort out my power bill and everything. I can spin up
Mhm.
servers pretty much easily
Yeah,
these
yeah.
days. It's not, as you say, it's not that expensive to get a clickable demo running that you can show somebody.
Mhm.
So it is a different place, I think, that we find ourselves in. And as you talk about building that network, do you think the tools today are just as good as having to fly around the world and meet people, because we can talk like this through video screens? We can still pick up the phone in the traditional way,
Mhm.
but a lot of what you've been talking is actually, you're talking earlier about being in the room and seeing how the CTO answers a question, etc., and flying around and building that network. That seems to be an
Mhm.
integral part of your world still.
Yeah, it is. I think there are markets and places where you can do, a bulk of it on Zoom or Teams or whatever. Um, I don't travel anywhere near as much as I used to, but for things that are really big, I will still make it a priority to get in a plane or get in a train and show up. And I think there are markets, like if you were doing business again in the Middle East, for example, just this would never result in a contract, right? Like you have to show up, you have to build a relationship. You won't even talk about business for your first 5 or 6 meetings in that part of the world. Likewise, if you're going out to Japan or Korea, again, these are physical relationship based locations, and you have to exchange business cards. You have to, in Japan and Korea, you've got to go out and get drunk, but you got to go sing karaoke with people, and only then does the kind of tangible business opportunity emerge. So I think it is still necessary. I think there is a lot of preliminary build up work and research and everything else that you can do, like this. And I have made a bunch of investments purely with people that I've met on Zoom, quite a lot actually. But most of those were out of necessity in the pandemic. I think now, like the deals that I've done since the pandemic, I think only once have I not met the team, and even then, a friend of mine had already invested in the company. 3 other friends of mine had met them. One of my colleagues had spent a bunch of time with them. So, like, I had a lot of proxies that I could rely on. But I do think that still, for better or for worse, for some big deals, and I say it to companies, like especially if you're raising a Series A, Series B, you want to target investors in the US, like you kind of have to just get in a plane, and you park yourself in San Francisco or New York for a week or two, and it's a little bit like I said, you just show up everywhere, and you become a person in that ecosystem for even for a brief period. But yeah, I think that, as I say, a lot we can do like this, but still, for a lot of big business deals, there is a kind of physical, tangible piece that has to happen.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that, Eamon. So, look, I want to move it on a little bit now, and I want to ask you about what's keeping you up at night, if anything at all. What are you thinking about over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? How do you plan now in the business world that you're in today? What are you thinking about? What's on your horizon? What's on your roadmap? How does that work in your world?
Yeah, I think I was I went through a phase of thinking I should have a plan, and then every time I tried to make one, it kind of changed about a week later. Um, so I kind of, over there are a bunch of things I want to do over the next 12 months. So I will obviously continue investing in businesses and supporting companies, and working on boards, and all of that side of things. There are one or two companies that I have worked with for a while now who I'm kind of maybe even a little bit more involved with. And in one case, helping them with a pivot. And I've kind of got my hands dirty again, helping them with the kind of back end and code, a little bit of the infrastructure and some of the stuff that they're doing. And I must admit, that's been nice. It's kind of like, oh, this is fun. Like I remember, and you, again, it's like I'm learning a bunch of stuff all the time because I'm doing something new, or something I haven't done in a long time. So it's kind of reactivating parts of my brain. So I would like to, whether it's, a side hustle or a side project or just something I do for fun, I feel like there is something like that in the next 12 months that will launch. Well, I know there is something like that in the next 12 months that I'll do more as a kind of a way. Like I think one of the challenges for me as a VC, I realize, is I give companies advice, but actually a lot of the advice that I give them is based on experience that I had 10 years ago. And like the tools that they use today, the resources, even the job titles that exist today are very different to what existed back then. So it's kind of, I listen to a lot of US VCs, particularly kind of operator VCs in the US, and they see that as a real advantage, that they're able to say, hey, I'm using all of the tools that you're using. I know all of the processes that you're going through. I'm working with similar code bases or languages, etc. So I'm excited to do a little bit more of that. That's been kind of fun to realize that, I'm not totally burnt out from a kind of, let's call it, founder perspective. So yeah, I'll continue tinkering around doing that. Continue investing in companies and supporting them. And this is my shameless plug, but the second edition of my book comes out later this month, so there'll be a bunch of work kind of promoting that, and really the book is effectively a dictionary of terms from the startup world. It's called the Startup Lexicon. It looks like this. Don't buy the other color because it's out of date. This is all the AI stuff in there. But really, that's kind of a primer for the language that we use in this kind of startup and tech world, and is very much focused on people who are thinking about starting companies, or maybe starting to invest, or people who are in college or in school and thinking about this as a career option, or folks who are kind of going through accelerators. So it's nice. I get to kind of go and talk to a bunch of people who are at that idea. So like you can almost see the light going on over their heads, and there is something very tangible and very exciting about being in the room as that happens. So I'm excited to do a little bit of, and hopefully some of that will involve maybe not necessarily getting on lots of airplanes, but certainly getting on the odd train or ferry here and there to see a little bit more of the world as we do it.
I like that. And it's great that something maybe historically that was hard work, blood, sweat, and tears is almost like a happy escape or a nice little holiday from the day job of VC investing. And that you can see that fire kindling away as you talk about it. It's you still have that burning opportunity there. And of course, the new edition maybe of the book as well. I think it's important that a point that you've raised, and I know everybody's talking about AI, but I suppose AI has been around for quite a while, but in its current sort of theme, whether it's with Microsoft or OpenAI and everybody else who's got offerings out there, it has changed the business world, particularly the startup world, hasn't it? Because I don't think there's not, startups are getting funded just, the joke is, unless they got AI in the name of the company, they're not getting any money at this stage, because it's such a game changer for lots of industries, isn't it? You must be seeing that all over the place in your world.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very true. Like, I mean, I saw a B2B AI wedding planner app came across the desk the other day, and I kind of thought, like, what, really is it going to predict who I want to invite to my wedding based on what, giving it access to all of my friendship graphs and stuff like this? Like, I don't know if anyone's ever been to an Irish wedding, but that's not how they work. It's a much the algorithm for who to invite to an Irish wedding is far more complex than even OpenAI could manage. So we do see a lot of nonsense, right? And I do think that there is, the tools that are out there now are impressive, right? I've tried is it Suna, the music generation platform, which is kind of cool, and you can see how you can use that for inspiration. I use Bard, the Google one. I use OpenAI, ChatGPT, and Claude every so often. More kind of brainstorming and kind of helping me with like really dumb questions about things. But I'm also conscious that, like, you can trust about half really of what they come back to you with. And then a lot of the pitches that we see, when you dig into the business, it's like it's a company that's a nice wrapper on top of an API. So I'm a little bit cynical about some of the stuff that's out there at the moment. I think very heavily funded companies, ChatGPT, OpenAI are printing money at the moment. So there are a few big businesses that will make a lot of money, but there are a lot of other businesses that I think actually you could build a great company, right? You build a business that turns over 250, 500K a year, $1 million a year, and just run it as a business and never have to worry about having someone like me sitting over your shoulder going, hey, when are you going to raise your next round, right? So I think there are opportunities there for people who want to build actual businesses rather than the kind of fantastical VC business. And that's what I'm excited about. But I also have a thesis that, like, the more automated a lot of things get, the more that we will have a craving for human connection, right? And whether that's live streaming, whether that is in-person events, like I'm kind of interested to explore what a human connection piece will look like, or how, if we all get universal basic income, like, how are we going to spend our time, right? And there are interesting businesses and technologies to consider. So I kind of think, yes, there's the AI piece, which is interesting and important, but, like, what are the second and third order effects that's going to have on culture and life and technology and interaction? And that's what I'm excited about, is like the second bounce of the ball.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people talk about sports in that context, don't they? Because until we're watching
Yeah.
robots play sports, it's a human-centric thing. I know it's streamed around the world using bits and bytes and lots of data centers and lots of undersea cables and satellites. But
Mm.
the bottom line is sport is probably one of those areas that's going to continue to explode and
Yeah,
grow.
visceral. Like the experience
Yeah.
of going to, a live match, especially if it's a team that you support and there's something on the line, is incredible. And likewise, concerts, right? Like there's a reason people are paying thousands of dollars to go and see Taylor Swift, because it is a communal, almost religious experience for people. And certainly I made a promise to myself after the pandemic that, like, if a band of, like, a favorite band of mine ever played, I would never ever find some stupid excuse to not go. It's like, I want to have that communal experience. I want to see that band. And yes, I could have a better audio experience by probably putting on a pair of headphones and listening to it in this room. And it wouldn't take me an hour and a half to commute home from Wembley or whatever. But the experience of being there with a bunch of other, smelly metalheads in their 40s, there's just nothing that can compare to that. Like drinking warm beer in a field with a bunch of people who care more about, Pantera than they do about, OpenAI. That's a lot of fun.
Sure, what's not to love, huh? Um, okay, well, look, as I move towards the end here, I've got two last questions I want to put to you, Eamon, if that's okay. I want to ask you if we've missed anything, if there's anything else on your radar, horizon, anything else that you're thinking about that we haven't discussed today that maybe we should include before we wrap up, or it could be something we've touched on already that you maybe want to expand on. And the second question is, if people want to get hold of the book, get in touch
Mhm.
with you as a VC, or find out more about everything you're involved in, where's the best place to point them to? So two questions there for you.
Yeah, I think the two parting pieces of advice, I guess, I would leave people with is one, is going back to something we talked about earlier, which is just try, the most interesting people I know are the people who are the most interested in other things. So I think sometimes, I meet a lot of founders who don't read or listen to podcasts or do anything else. I'm not saying these are the only things that you can do, but I think, if you're thinking about starting a company, you should be digging into, like, you should fall down a lot of rabbit holes, right? You should have a large degree of intellectual curiosity, because you just never know when, as I said earlier, you hear and overhear a conversation or a statistic, or you see, some bloke with watching TV on his phone in a subway, you never know what's going to happen around you. So even though I know it's easier to kind of scratch your brain by, looking at TikTok for 45 minutes and then falling asleep, it's also kind of a good thing to, try and whether it's a couple of Substacks or Medium articles, or listen to a couple of podcasts. I think it's just really important. And likewise, if you're starting a company, you have to talk to your customers, right? Like you have to lose your shame and get out and have a conversation with people, even if it's just with a few mock-ups going, I'm building the Uber for dog walking. You own a dog. Would you use an app that looks like this? I think that is more valuable to me than, like, I've spent 20 grand paying someone to design me something nice. I met a founder at a conference once in Turkey, and he had literally drawn on pieces of paper the UI for his app and gone out and spoken to people and had his friend video him doing it. And it's like, I admire that much more than anything else, like the hustle that it takes to do that. So kind of be curious. I would also say, like, the best piece of advice that I was ever given is, like, the way you do little things is how you do everything. So, like, sweat the details in what you're doing. If you're going to send an email you want to reach out to VCs looking for funding, it's very easy to use an AI tool that will automatically pull a bunch of email addresses from a CSV file and send them perfectly tailored AI message. But, like, we know when it's AI, and then we know when someone has sent us something where they've, like, read our LinkedIn page or read an article that we wrote or whatever. So just those little details go a long, long way and make a huge difference. And that goes, spelling on your website. The good thing is you can use Grammarly or ChatGPT to do that. But just really basic things make a big difference, not just to me, but, like, we launched the site a couple of years ago with a company where, they hadn't thought about some accessibility options and color schemes, and just little things like that create a lot of negative feedback. So just be wary of that. And then in terms of where to find me, I have a great many things to be thankful to my family for. One of which is my name, which is amazing for SEO. There's not a lot of Eamonn Carey, so if you Google me, you're pretty much guaranteed. There's another one who's a lawyer who kind of pops up in my Google News every so often, an M&A lawyer. So I'm kind of hopeful that someday we can do a deal together, just for the sheer shenanigans of it. But I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and I'm pretty easy to find if people want to reach out to me. And then the book is called The Startup Lexicon, in all good online retailers, and hopefully some physical ones by the time we get into next year. But that's and reach out. I can't promise I reply to every message I get on LinkedIn, especially if I know it's from an AI, but I do try to respond to as many of them as I can.
Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing all that, Eamonn. And look, it brings us nicely to the end of our discussion here today on the global discussion. Before we wrap up, I just want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode, wherever they are in the world. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. And hopefully you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Eamonn. But Eamonn, thanks for being on the show. Real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.